some millionaires are preparing for a nuclear apocalypse and investing incredible amounts of money into building elite bunkers. At least the press is currently writing about Mark Zuckerberg, who is already making himself a cozy underground nest in Hawaii, and about Elon Musk, who plans to hide from Armageddon in an armored Tesla. And there are also other wealthy people who thought about the nuclear end of the world even earlier, such as the owner of the Vivos company, Robert Vicino. Back in the 2000s, he took care of the emergence of an elite shelter in Kansas. He was prompted to do this by information that supposedly, in the event of a nuclear war, only 5,000 people on the entire planet would be able to avoid death. And some millions of dollars for the construction of almost an underground city do not seem to him like such a great loss as his life. Before you start thinking about where to get an extra $1 million to build a bunker for the nuclear doomsday yourself, let's first figure out how real all these terrible prospects are. Can nuclear weapons really turn the Earth into ashes? Should we expect the end of civilization? Today, we will tell you the truth about nuclear weapons and say goodbye to the ubiquitous myths about them. And let's start with the most frightening picture painted by alarmists. Supposedly, as soon as a nuclear war breaks out, the end of all life on Earth will immediately come. Can you imagine this moonscape? Now forget it, because this is a myth. And even if all the owners of nuclear weapons simultaneously go crazy and arrange a mass fireworks display, that is, detonate all the bombs at once, our planet will not turn into a desert, and it won't split in half either. This variation of the myth appeared back during the Cold War, but even out of respect for its age, it is by no means realistic. But mathematicians and physicists have long refuted this scary story. They even derived a formula that makes it possible to calculate the consequences of explosions. And if we trust numbers rather than fears, then a surface explosion of an incredibly powerful 58 megaton ammunition, similar to the Tsar bomb, will create a crater about 200 meters in diameter. Don't believe the numbers? Look at the facts. When the artificial Chegan Lake was created in 1965, a well 178 meters deep was drilled. And yet after the explosion, the crater was still about 100 meters deep. So, returning to the destruction of everything on the planet, let's count. The average power of the warheads available in different countries is about half a megaton. Even if we overcompensate for our calculations and imagine 5 megaton bombs, calculate their deadly effect and divide it by the total surface area of the Earth. Then, it turns out that to turn our planet into a continuous desert, about 70,000 such bombs would be needed. And humanity does not have anywhere near that much nuclear weapons, because the total stockpiles of all nuclear countries are even now 5 times smaller. And we're not even talking about the fact that most of them are much weaker. Then, the most stubborn supporters of the theory of total nuclear apocalypse will say that nothing prevents countries from going ahead and producing 5 times more atomic bombs. And this is another myth that we should say goodbye to, because nuclear weapons are very, very expensive. Okay, you'll say, but according to the calculations of some hypothetical maniac with a nuclear button in his hand, it is cheaper to wipe a hostile city off the face of the Earth with one powerful atomic bomb than to bombard it with hundreds of missiles and air bombs. And then, it turns out, you can simply redirect the budget from other types of weapons. And voila, the nuclear Armageddon is in your pocket. But no. Again, let's count, relying on history. During World War II, the bombing of Tokyo did indeed involve thousands of people and ammunition, while the infamous destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki cost only 2 atomic bombs. But let's look at how much those bombs cost. The budget of the Manhattan Project in 1945 was 90% of the total US spending on small arms, and almost 40% of the total spending on tanks. It turns out that the 2 bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki cost as much as tens of thousands of tanks and planes. Don't forget that atomic bombs were not launched from a slingshot. A special B-29 bomber was needed, and its creation cost even more than the creation of the bomb itself. Not for nothing is it considered the most expensive project of World War II. And even when the development costs were left behind, ahead were still millions and millions of dollars for maintaining nuclear weapons. And it comes at a hefty price. For example, when the US set out to modernize the W-80 nuclear warheads, each cost $75 million. Do you still not think that maintaining nuclear weapons is terribly expensive? Then here's another fact. From 1940 to 1998, the US spent $5 trillion on its nuclear arsenal, which is equal to 20 years of China's military budgets. So even the most desperate sociopath with a nuclear button will not be able to financially afford a rapid buildup of nuclear potential on a threatening scale. We know that it will not be so easy to dissuade you. You are already wondering whether, after all, our imaginary global terrorist will not want to sell everything in his country, together with his wife and mother-in-law, in order to afford this whim at any cost. An inexhaustible supply of nuclear weapons, because it seems that this would definitely ensure his victory in any war, right? To be honest, this would be his dumbest idea, because nuclear weapons do not guarantee anything like that. The myth that nuclear weapons are a 100% game changer in any war is based on a misconception about the history of World War II. It was then, as we know, that atomic bombs were used for the first and, fortunately, last time so far. Some people mistakenly believe that it was those tragic events in Hiroshima and Nagasaki that forced Japan to immediately surrender. But that's not the case at all. The facts and figures show that during World War II, there was no particular difference between an atomic bomb and conventional weapons. Bombings without any nuclear weapons claimed just as many lives and caused just as much destruction as the Fat Man dropped on Nagasaki. On March 10, 1945, in just one day, about 300 US bombers destroyed 40% of Tokyo's housing stock. At that time, according to the most modest estimates, 80,000 people were killed. And these are absolutely comparable figures with the losses resulting from the dropping of the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. 100,000 people died in Dresden as a result of conventional bombardment in 1945. 275,000 Ethiopians lost their lives during 1935-1936 as a result of chemical attacks by the Italians. As you can see, humanity has a tremendous horrific experience of mass destruction, and it did not usually end in surrender, as was the case with the use of the Little Boy and Fat Man atomic bombs. And even in Emperor Hirohito's statement on August 17, 1945, there was not a word about it. But the myth of surrender due to the use of nuclear weapons has somehow stuck, as has the myth about the irreversible radioactive contamination of the territory from a nuclear explosion. Interestingly, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are right now alive, populated, thriving cities. But the idea that an atomic bomb not only destroys everything in the affected area, but also irreversibly irradiates a much larger territory, causing all life to die from radiation sickness, still lingers in some people's minds. Some even believe that a territory contaminated by a nuclear explosion remains uninhabitable for hundreds and even thousands of years. Well, if such people are not convinced by the fact that Hiroshima and Nagasaki are currently alive, populated, thriving cities, then here are the scientific facts. The intensity of radiation 7 hours after a nuclear explosion drops 10 times, after 49 hours, 100 times, and after 343 hours, 1,000 times. Of course, at the moment of the explosion and in the first hours after it, radiation is an enormous threat, but it is also absolutely certain that it does not compare with the consequences of the Chernobyl disaster and does not turn the area into a dangerous radioactive wasteland. And proof of this is Bikini Atoll, where the American military once tested a 15-megaton hydrogen bomb. After 4 years, biologists discovered thriving meter-high corals and a completely restored ecosystem right in the crater from the explosion. But let's not relax too much, because in addition to alarmist myths that make you want to start an underground bunker life right away, there are also opposite ones. Supposedly, nuclear weapons, as long as they don't have a detonator attached, are so safe that you can give them to a child instead of a teething toy. And this is also a very, very dangerous delusion. And history knows a great deal about tragic incidents related to nuclear munitions. From 1950 to 1968 alone, and only in the United States, as many as 1,200 nuclear weapons caused emergency hazards. And this is only what was discovered thanks to an investigation by the national interest. Not to mention the tragedies in other countries that remain classified and unknown to the general public. As history shows, anything can cause trouble. For example, a socket wrench attachment dropped by a worker into a missile silo. And this is not a joking assumption. This is a real example from 1980. The attachment punctured the fuel tank of the first stage of the missile and caused a leak. Personnel were evacuated urgently, but shortly afterwards, the missile with a nuclear warhead exploded. The 740-ton silo cover was blown off like a feather. As you can see, this is not like dropping keys down a drain. The consequences can really be fatal. On January 24, 1961, a B-52 aircraft was carrying 2 thermonuclear bombs, 300 times more powerful than those that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There was a fuel leak. The plane broke apart in the air. The crew was killed. As instructed, the bombs separated from the aircraft, but the parachute opened on only one of the 2. And unfortunately, the series of tragic coincidences did not end there. For at that very moment, 3 of the 4 safety switches were turned off, causing the bomb to be put into combat readiness. Just imagine what could have happened if it weren't for the low voltage switch that prevented a tragedy of unprecedented proportions. Meanwhile, the second bomb was scattered, so that the plutonium charge and a pile of radioactive debris had to be searched for by engineer troops. So, as you understand, juggling nuclear warheads and using an atomic bomb as a press for making cheese is quite an idea. For despite all of today's debunking of the most popular myths about nuclear weapons, it still remains very, very deadly and dangerous. But as you now know, the complete and total destruction of the planet should not be expected from it, so with spending millions on personal bunkers, we can still wait a little.